once you've defined some processes, at some point it's time to run those processes and actually see how they work for your business. The way to trigger process, and anyone on your team can do this, is to go to the procedure list, find the process that you want to start, and click the rocket. So we're going to, let's suppose we're making a release for Delegate today, and we want to run our deployment checklist process. I click the rocket, and what's going to happen is I now have to give a little bit of more information. If you recall, when we set up the procedure, we created an anchor date called the deployment date. We also need to name it. We advise that you give a descriptive name. This is something to train your team up on how you want to call these. So for this deployment process, we'll call this, today is May the 6th. So we're going to have a May 6th deployment. And the deployment date, I guess a little bit redundant here, but we're going to use that because that's our anchor date. So every task in our process is relative to that. And then we click Start Procedure. So now that you've started the procedure, this is actually taking you into the checklist for that process. And so we can see here all of the steps that we had previously input. And you can see that the due dates have been calculated from our anchor date. So ideally, I'm making this today. We should have tagged our release yesterday, and Tyrell's done that. So Tyrell would come in and check the done box, and we can now track that it's been completed. If I go back to my checklist page and list all of the open checklists for all our processes, we see our May 6th deployment, which is a Delegate deployment checklist, and we can see that one of the 4 items have been completed. So this updates constantly as members of your team are working on things. So one thing I really want to point out about the checklist, and anyone on your team can get to it by coming to the checklist and clicking here. If there's something that's due and outstanding on their plate, it'll show up on their dashboard as something that's either due today or overdue. But we'll go into the checklist and look. One thing you'll notice is we have 2 ways of checking off a task. We have done and we have not applicable. This is really important to building simple workflows, in our opinion. The idea is that instead of trying to build out these complicated flowcharts of logic where if this happens, then these things need to happen, otherwise these other things need to happen, which requires you to model things out, and you almost have to have a math background to think through the logic of it. It's not great for the team to build their processes this way. We think that's a big impediment to getting stuff done. Instead, by being able to mark a task off as not applicable, it gives you the ability to build out all the steps of your process. We believe your team knows the right thing to do. The purpose of Delegate is not to be a coach and teach your people how to do their jobs well. Supposing that you've got a team that really knows their processes, this is about tracking the accountability of it. And for whatever reason, if Tyrell decides that we don't need to make a database backup because we run automated backups 4 or 5 times a day, and we have one that's scheduled to go out, or we're going to do the release right after that automated backup, he can mark it not applicable. And what that means is it's not going to sit there and stop the process from going and tell us that we have a step that we didn't complete. But since we didn't take an action here, we still have the record and accountability that whatever needed to be done was done. But if Tyrell checks this off, he's certifying that he made the decision that this wasn't applicable to this particular case. So it's a really neat way to not have to build if this, then that type relationships. Instead, you can mark things off without explicitly saying that the action was taken, and that's a really cool way to document things. So as we start checking things off the list, our checklist is being updated. We're now 2 out of 4 completed, and eventually, once the entire process is completed, everything's checked off, we're good to go. When we go back to the checklist page, we'll see the big green check mark that lets us know the process was completed. You can see we have several other processes completed here. These are checked off. A completed process is going to disappear from this dashboard after 30 days. So that way you don't have this endless list of things that have been done. However, if it's been 30 days have passed and you have some old checklists, you'll have a button here in the application that lets you know there are some older checklists that were filtered out, and you can always get back to them if you want to go look at the historical accounting. So that's how you run a process in Delegate.